CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins us now from D.C. Major, I believe you and I were talking. I believe you were down in Mar-a-Lago. It's hard to keep up with all of the indictments, but after the former president was indicted in this case, he made a bit of a meal of it, as I recall.
Yes.
Take that moment in time and to where we are today right now, and give me your impressions, having covered this man for so long.
So, at Mar-a-Lago, we spoke because the former president was throwing the first of its kind, an indictment party, essentially, rallying those around him to what he said at the time was an unjust process that was out to get him, and that he was beginning the process of identifying himself as a victim of the legal system. And many in the audience at Mar-a-Lago, quite predictably, were supportive of that. That was one moment. I also remember, John, because I covered the presidential campaign of Donald Trump extensively for about 16 months. And I remembered when he was a candidate, then when he was president, and stories or questions about this kind of conduct arose, whether it was any previous affair or was there ever an attempt to bury that information. All questions about that were met with hostile, forceful, aggressive denials. Those denials evaporated in the courthouse proceedings of the last 5.5 to 6 weeks. It had been proven, established, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that there was a process by which stories favorable were placed, unfavorable caught and killed. Now, whether the country believes that is a crime sufficient enough to render the former president now a convicted felon who faces prison time is a separate matter. My only point, John, is that the former president at Mar-a-Lago, when this conversation you and I are having just began this evening, was about how the system was unjust and all these things alleged were untrue and false. Many of those allegations have now been proven to be true, and those aggressive denials did not withstand evidentiary scrutiny. And one of the things the country is going to begin to debate from this day forward, from this moment forward, John, is the absolute value of the terminology rigged. Because the former president says in every instance, every single instance, whether it's a civil case, whether it's about whether or not he sexually assaulted a woman in New York, or his business records in this case were fraudulent or not. Every single case, January 6th, Fulton County, classified documents. In every instance, the entire system is arrayed against him and him alone.
Yes.
Well, now a jury of his peers has said, you know what, it's not arrayed against you. It's your conduct that brought all this into being in the first place. And there's a law that asks us whether or not that conduct is felonious or not. And 12 jurors said unanimously 34 times, it is.
We just saw pictures there of the former president in front of Trump Tower, a building that is thoroughly associated with this city, as the former president has been for his entire life. Let me ask you this, Major, as the final question. Okay, there's a campaign going on, but give me your sense of some of the effects that will happen from this. I mean, everything from there are people applying and auditioning to be his vice president. How will they react to this? And what incentives might they have to now talk about the jury system and what's rigged and what isn't rigged? How do you think this will ripple through the election?
In Republican precincts across this country, John, this will echo as what the former president describes it as. Something that should never have been brought, that is a miscarriage of justice, or to use the terminology of the sitting chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, a travesty or a shameful day in America, as the Speaker of the House of Representatives said in a statement this afternoon. That will resonate among Republicans. Many Democrats and maybe some independents might say to themselves, the system now is applying accountability. And if there's been anything constant from their vantage point about former President Trump, is his ability to dodge accountability and essentially say to the systems of our country, what are you going to do about it? And doing so with a kind of impunity that drove Democrats, certainly, and maybe some independents, to the point of distraction, if not worse. There will be partisan alignment, as there is almost everything in our political life in this country right now, John. But there will be some fair-minded Americans who are not hard partisans, right or left, who will now scrutinize this because the system has rendered a judgment. Until this afternoon, that judgment was a pure abstraction. It is abstract no longer.
Major Garrett from Washington. Thank you so much, Major.